Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for coming to the second part of our Co-Creating the Future of Publishing webinar titled Open Access and the Way Forward. And of course, as the title says, it is going to be centric on open access and its future. And we have three spectacular speakers lined up for you. Just a bit of a note, if you have any questions during the presentation, there is a questions tab, which you can put your questions while the presentation is going on. But of course, you can put it after the presentations are done as well. So of course, this is also brought to you by Wiley Partner Solutions. If you don't know who we are, we will have a link later on to kind of go and check us out. So without further ado, I will introduce our fabulous speakers today. First, we have Sven Fund, who is a senior director here at Wiley. With being a senior director, he's also the senior director of Knowledge Unlatched, which is a part of Wiley Partner Solutions as well. He works with OABLE, which is an open access management software solution that empowers institutions with the tools to unify publisher workflows and streamline management operations. And we have Catherine Sharples, who is the VP for Open Research. Catherine leads the teams responsible for delivering Wiley's transition to open access and for ensuring that publishing policies and practices are aligned with the principles of open research. And last but not least, we have Alberto Pepe, who is the Director of Strategy and Innovation here at Wiley. Alberto focuses on the development and promotion of open science tools and initiatives. And of course, Alberto co-founded Authoria, a platform for the creation and dissemination of preprints and open research outputs, which is also now a part of Wiley Partner Solutions. So yes, let's head right in. I'm gonna hand it off to Catherine to start us off.
Thanks, Jude. Our conversation today is about open access and also more broadly about open research. And whilst today's webinar, as you've heard, is titled Co-Creating the Future of Publishing, I think it's clear that open access isn't just the future of publishing, it's very much the here and the now of publishing. We're no longer in a world in which publishers are deciding whether or not to embrace open access, a world in which we're unsure if researchers want to make their work open or not. We're operating in a world in which researchers, their research institutions and funders are demanding open access, a world in which, as publishers, our focus is on how to make open access and open science a reality for all the stakeholders in the scholarly communications ecosystem. A world in which the infrastructure to support open access is as important as the journals to publish in. Open access is built on the principle that the world's knowledge is more powerful when it's shared and when it's available for others to build upon, so that other researchers, professionals, and the public can use it to do real good in the world. Researchers need choice as much as they need openness, which for us means multiple pathways to open access. Increasing numbers of fully open access journals sitting alongside subscription journals which also offer an open access option. Pre-printing options to allow for the earliest possible sharing of work. Open peer review practices to provide visibility of and credit for the valuable work that peer reviewers provide. The funding environment is changing rapidly with increasing requirements for all research findings, not solely the peer-reviewed article, to be openly available to all. By opening up access to research data, by sharing research data and making sure that it's fair, that it's findable, accessible, interoperable and reusable, then we helped to ensure that researchers can analyze each other's findings, can reuse it to inform new findings, helping the research landscape become more efficient and more accountable. Researchers benefit from making their research data openly available too. More transparent research data helps reviewers see how researchers are progressing. Data collection and data analysis Making that visible enables us to provide more nuanced feedback and to provide a greater understanding of that data. So when researchers make their data fair, they're showing the world that they're working transparently and reproducibly, building a strong reputation and encouraging the reuse and citation of data. The introduction of things like journal-level data sharing policies was and continues to be a really important step in this direction. Open practices which focus on transparency and collaboration in research practice, in communication and peer review also help to drive the pace of research discovery. And when we focus on increasing transparency at the various stages of the publishing process and in the various parts of our portfolio, then we really help to accelerate the pace of change. More broadly, as funders require early accessibility of research findings, and as researchers see the benefit of sharing fast and early, then researchers are sharing their work on preprint servers, such as the ones that Jude mentioned at the top of this presentation. This access is vital in situations like a global health emergency that we've all been living through for the past 3 years, where the best evidence really needs to be available freely and immediately. And I'm sure that's something that Alberto is going to touch on when he speaks to us in a few minutes. At present, a relatively small number of journals offer a transparent or an open peer review process. Within Wiley's own portfolio, we currently have about 75 journals offering this, meaning that if an article is published, then the peer review reports, the author's responses and the editor's decisions are published alongside the article. Reviewers have the option to disclose their names alongside reports if they wish. Making this part of the publishing process transparent, we can really improve accountability for the decision-making process and help to improve recognition for peer reviewers. Along similar lines, ensuring that researchers get credit for their work is really critical. We currently publish about 1,000 journals that require researchers to provide their ORCID ID to link their professional activities back to research so that funders and institutions and societies can identify their contributions. Journals are starting to adopt the credit taxonomy or the contributions to role taxonomy, which again allows for a standardized description of each author's individual contribution to an article. But in an open access world, persistent identifiers, not just for corresponding authors and contributors, but for funders and institutions and for all types of research outputs, are essential to ensuring that we can link all of the stakeholders of the many and various parties contributing to research together. Many of these services were developed by and cater for the needs of specific research communities, but their benefits to researchers as a whole are universal. Next slide. Oh, great, next slide. I've talked for the last few minutes about the benefits of open access and open research in, I guess, what you could describe as somewhat grandiose and philosophical terms: open access, open data, open research practices for the greater good, if you like. But I wanted to show you this slide to bring us back to some more tangible benefits for authors. This slide comes from a study that we conducted back in 2021, looking into 4 years worth of publication data at Wiley. We analysed articles published in journals across 4 different publishing models, including free access after an embargo period, subscription access, hybrid open access, and fully open access. And we found that open access outperforms subscription articles across the span of citations, downloads, and general attention, delivering real benefits to authors and for journals, helping ensure that they can both thrive long into the future. So there's real potential, I think, for publishers, for societies and industry to work together to deliver the openness that will drive further change and to deliver even more benefits to even more authors in the environment as that environment changes. Next slide, please. Thanks. Jude asked each of us to talk a little bit about the way forward. Where does open access and open research go in the near and medium term? I certainly expect to see more open access journals, more journals transitioning from the subscription to the hybrid business model. From the subscription or hybrid business model to a full open access business model. Recent announcements from Coalition S certainly point in that direction. But I wanted to highlight here some other areas of focus, other areas where collaboration and thoughtful leadership will be critical. Transparency is one of those. I spoke a few minutes ago about transparency in the research process, but here I'm actually talking about transparency of service. What are the ways that we can make the services and the value that journals, that societies, and that publishing partners add to the research process? How can we make the benefits of publishing in a given journal more visible to the researcher who's deciding where to submit their next paper? Can we make average review and publication times more transparent? Can we provide greater visibility of the geographic reach in terms of usage that one journal versus another journal provides? I think that's going to be a really big focus in the near term. Data, I've already touched a little bit on data, and certainly towards the end of last year, we were talking a lot about data when we saw the White House Office for Science and Technology Policy, the OSTP, announce new policy guidance to federal agencies with research and development expenditure on updating their public access policies. And whilst that document certainly addressed research articles and the expectation that they're made open access, it actually devotes just as much, if not more, attention to making the scientific data underlying peer-reviewed scholarly publications freely available. It encourages agencies to develop approaches for sharing scientific data, and it points for the need to develop more and new digital data repositories. Journals absolutely need to have clear and robust data sharing policies, but we also need to think about the means and the mechanism for ensuring that those policies are adhered to, and for linking those policies to appropriate repositories and perhaps to data checking, validation and curation services. And finally, I'll point to the issue of equity or global equity issues. Removing access barriers to research and to data is clearly beneficial to authors. But how do we ensure that our means of doing so doesn't disadvantage a whole group of authors by effectively reducing their access to publishing? For example, authors in low and middle income countries, the LMICs that you see referenced on this slide, where funding is more challenging or more challenged, we know that funding can be a major hurdle for many scholars. Not every researcher has access to an institutional agreement, a transformative open access agreement like the many that Wiley has been signing. We need to ensure that those who don't have access to funding to source their own APCs can still publish open access. So we support initiatives like Research for Life, which provide APC discounts and waivers for authors in LMICs. But we also recognize that more solutions are needed, and there are interesting experiments taking place in this space. Advancing equity and ensuring the long-term sustainability of individual and diverse publishing venues is a challenge that we need to work in partnership with stakeholders across the research ecosystem to address. Long-term solutions, not short-term fixes, are needed, and we're absolutely committed to developing those. And with that, I will pause and hand over to my good colleague Sven Fund to continue our theme.
Thanks so much, Catherine, and good afternoon, everybody from Berlin, where it's becoming evening. So let me, right there where Catherine stopped, pick it up and talk about a little bit my view of what has happened more on the business side of publishing, if I may say so, and on the services side that we are seeing. Next slide, please. So I guess in the past, which I describe as yesterday here, roughly the last 2 decades, I would say, and as you know, these time frames are not like one day here, another day over there. I guess over the last 2 decades or so, we have seen a pattern which was really defined by big deals of different sorts, where like the acquisition of content by librarians particularly has been like the driving force also for publishers' portfolios and the library world. That came with a great advantage for both sides. It also had disadvantages, by the way, but the advantages clearly are predictability and control, basically, of business models. It's a relatively stable setting in which the ecosystem is being used to play. However, I spoke about disadvantages. There's also was kind of a growing discontent between publishers and libraries due to significant pricing pressure in different parts. Catherine addressed also the issue of cost in low and medium income countries. I guess librarians from other parts of the world also feel a pressure because obviously R&D spending and hence the output in research from research activity is growing faster than in many cases public budgets are that are funding publication acquisitions. I think one of the probably most important underlying trends of the last 20 years really is the growing global coordination among libraries and consortia globally. So if you see today, if Wiley or any other publisher signs a transformative agreement, it's usually almost online next day and being seen and being taken into consideration by other consortia. I think in the beginning, frankly, from publishers' perspectives, that might have been a kind of disturbing idea. I think right now we are living also in that respect in a much more open and much more transparent environment where obviously customers coordinate much better and can also get their learnings out of this. And what I also find important is that, especially when we talk about open research, open access, that there have been like these largely separate worlds of academia and corporate markets. So I guess in the early days of open access, there was on the academic side always the suspicion, if the content is all open, if it has been funded by academic institutions, do corporates just take advantage of this now? Is it getting easier for them? I think we see in different industries, in pharma, for example, that there is a very strong trend to make pledges into open access publications as well. I would assume that that will also happen in engineering disciplines and so on. But in the past, those have been separate worlds with all kinds of implications on that. Where are we today? Next slide, please. I guess we are in a kind of loop jump, if you want, on a business model revolution and not really evolution anymore. So we are not only transferring from a pay world into an open world, but also from a reading focused into a publishing focused world. And I guess that makes it really difficult because there are many moving parts for practically every player in the field, whether it's publishers, whether it's libraries, whether it's researchers that Catherine spoke to a lot, but also funders and other institutions. So there is a lot of stuff that we need to make sense of in this environment. And I think with like underlying all of those trends is that openness in many disciplines has really become a norm now, as funding is really moving away from single article decision making into transformative agreements, if you want, big deals of open access, if I may say so. So if you look at, for example, research which has been done by the Max Planck Digital Library about the impact that Project DEAL in Germany had on the openness of research from Germany, it's literally exploding at the point where funding got centrally available for transformative agreements that were provided to through Wiley and Springer Nature content. And then there are tools like what I'm working on, which Jude mentioned in the beginning, or Able, where we are trying to basically help this new chaos basically out there, where institutions have to manage a large number of different agreements, of different eligibility criteria and so on. So it has become pretty complex. And I think we see this high degree of really technological interconnectedness in the scientific community just emerging now, and that's also being reflected in this higher complexity. We all, I guess, are right now part of an interesting conversation, which is just starting about AI-based solutions that might be a challenge to the limits of scholarly publishing and librarianship. So my son's teacher is really concerned about ChatGPT because she doesn't really know whether this means that everything is being written from tomorrow on by a machine and not by my son and his peers anymore. I find that exciting and interesting. My son finds it even more interesting and is experimenting to kind of expand the system. But I think in publishing and also in librarianship, this can be incredibly helpful tools. Obviously, we are at the very beginning. This is all pretty primitive compared to what we can imagine. But if I'm writing an article myself, I always find the abstract the most problematic thing to write. Imagine abstracts in the future will be written by a smart machine, and I don't have to sit there for 2 hours and think about a kind of summary of what I already believe was the summary, which was the article. So I think publishing can help a lot, and I think also on the library side, on the retrieval side, on the discovery side, we can offer a lot of solutions together. Obviously, and Kathleen spoke to that as well, there are escalating challenges around peer review as a discipline. Those are not primarily technological, I would say. Maybe they are technology induced, but they are also social. So we need to make sure that peer review gets the visibility and the importance in the visibility that it has in the research process. And I guess then there is a kind of conflict in at least some of the disciplines, as I mentioned, of corporates and their high buying power in this situation that we are in right now. So how can I imagine the future, which is probably the most interesting for us as managers and people working in this field right now, because our job is not to form the past or justify the past or today, but really think forward for 3 to 5 years and see what do we need to do to decide today to really prepare our environment in the best possible way for the future. Next slide, please. I think first of all, what we have probably lost over the last 2 decades was the focus on researchers. So libraries and publishers alike, I think, have very much focused on each other because they were important buyers and important sellers on the commercial side. I think that will kind of fall apart to a certain degree. And I think the role of researchers in terms of autonomy and choice in a digital environment will be much, much bigger than it has been over the last 2 decades. And I think that's something to look forward to for publishers and for libraries, but obviously it needs completely new skills for many of us, and we have to kind of relearn these practices. I'm hoping that this will be more data-centered and more analytics-driven than, if I may say so, brand-driven than in the past. There is good points to be made that openness also means openness to new players in an ecosystem, which bring innovation, not just having a set of predefined players that defend positions. But I guess that tension between the two is really where change will happen. We at Wiley Partner Solutions, I think, believe in our daily work really and try to practice this, that collaboration instead of competition also with publishing partners, with other publishers, with societies, is a much better economic paradigm going forward. Academic publishing is really a small industry. It's a small field, and working together and not reinventing the wheel in every publishing house and every society also has a societal benefit. And I think that's something where we will see more coming. Obviously, corporates can be drivers of innovation. I see a lot of interesting projects coming out of corporates right now, especially when it comes to data-driven publishing and the question of whether we can find forms of micro-publishing and machine readability of text, for example, beyond what we have today. There's obviously a strong interest in those areas. Here are 3 question marks. I don't know the answer. Is academic publishing probably something which can be less volume driven in the future than it has been so far? Is it really important to continuously increase output? What about another tension, STM and humanities and social sciences publishing? Do we leave these behind, or is this also part of a kind of inclusion approach, if you want, of certain disciplines? And I guess the conflicts in the world show us that it makes sense to look into social sciences and humanities so now and then as well. And last thing, because I'm at 10 minutes already, do we really move away from publishing relatively hermetic articles into more of machine readable content, which I already mentioned, and into smaller units, and really, as Catherine said, create clouds of wisdom and content around an article, or is it just a monolithic way of putting content into each other? And with that, Alberto, you have to now compile all that stuff together to make sense of it. Over to you.
Oh yeah, I'm ready for that. So thank you so much, Sven. Thank you for having me. And for the next 10 minutes, I'll try to convince you that research was always intended to be open. So I love it that Sven took an historical approach, going from yesterday to today to tomorrow. I'm actually going to take a much longer historical context and timeline. And actually, on my next slide, I'm going to take you to 400 years ago and show you the work of one of the founding fathers of the scientific method, Italian astrophysicist Galileo Galilei. And this is actually one of the first articles that was ever published. So it's from about actually almost exactly 400 years ago, 402 years ago. And it's the Sidereus Nuncius, or the Starry Messenger. So this is an important article because for the first time, we got observational evidence that we're not the center of the universe. So this was like the article that in a way abolished the idea of a geocentric model of the universe. And the way it happened is that Galileo, by the use of a telescope, so a new device, a new sort of scientific device, was able to see 4 planets orbiting around Jupiter. And so Galileo was the first human, probably the first animal ever, to actually be able to observe some celestial bodies not orbiting Earth, which was believed to be the center of the universe, but orbiting another object, Jupiter. So this is a revolutionary kind of discovery. And Galileo, of course, being a scientist and one of the people that are probably like responsible for starting the scientific method and scientific publishing as we know it today, ended up publishing his results so that he could disseminate the results with other scientists, with the public. And if we look onto the next slide at one of the pages that he published, this is what it looks like. So this is one of the pages of the actual article. This is, of course, an English translation. But what's interesting about the article is that Galileo is reporting on his exact findings. So he's actually describing exactly what was happening at the time of observation. So he points the telescope to Jupiter, and then he's actually recording in the paper that he published his actual notes. So what Galileo is doing is essentially doing open notebook research publishing. Is not publishing an analysis or a distillation of the results. He's actually publishing every single thing that he's observing. So you can imagine one of the first articles ever published was, already doing open research and open data. Again, the important thing here is that Galileo is not distilling and summarizing the results. He's actually publishing everything that he's observing. And by doing so, he's also opening up the potential and possibility for reproducibility, for other people to use a telescope to dispute his findings and take sort of science to the next level by level of like approximation to the best possible knowledge we have about a specific finding or a specific phenomenon. So next slide, please. So of course, we've gone a long way in the last 400 years. Science has advanced a lot. Not only we can now use telescopes to observe our own planets in our own solar system, but we actually put telescopes in space and look at planets orbiting other stars, other suns. And we're doing that at scale. On top of that, we have, as I said, telescopes in space that can look further in time and space, really giving us a glimpse of what the origin of the universe looks like. And this is incredibly exciting. The fact that for the last 400 years, since the birth of the scientific method, we have an operation in place that allows us to move this far into like the sort of pursuit of knowledge. Next slide, please. So, of course, not only science has advanced, scientific publishing has also made incredible progress in the last 400 years. We now have an entire establishment around publishing that allows the public and other scientists to advance as fast as possible. Scientific papers have become digital, machine readable, and the future, as Sven was describing, is also from a technological perspective looking very promising. And as Catherine was also saying in her presentation, we're making scientific research more accessible and just more useful to more people at the same time. Next slide, please. Another thing that has been discussed both by Sven and Catherine is the idea of speed and the speed at which scientific research is being disseminated. So I love this to always present this chart because I think it really describes very well, with just 2 lines, what happened since the pandemic. I'm a huge proponent of preprints and using preprints as a test bed, as an experimental platform to do new things in science. But for a long time, preprints were only confined to the fields of computer science and physics. So things have changed since the pandemic broke out 3 years ago, and this is probably one of the silver linings of the pandemic. If you just look at the first 6 months in 2020, that's what the graphic is showing, is that for each single article that was published, peer-reviewed article that was published, there was a corresponding preprint associated with it. So there was a one-to-one relationship between preprints and peer-reviewed articles. That was unheard of in the field of medicine. So things have really gone a long way, and preprints are now become an important component of the publishing ecosystem that we're part of. Next slide, please. So having said that, when we look at what we're publishing today, I believe that a lot of research we publishers and in general, like scientists, we're responsible for, are still very much in a format that hasn't really changed dramatically in the last 400 years. Galileo was publishing text and figures, and today we're publishing text and figures. Yes, of course, we brought the entire, all of the content to a digital format. It is online, it is searchable, but it's missing the actual ability to drill into the content and the notebook, the actual findings of our researchers. And so I believe that we're still failing to capture the more interactive, data-driven nature of the research we're publishing. On to the next slide. So in this next couple of minutes, I'd like to showcase an experiment we're doing, of course, using preprints to show that I believe that there's a way forward that is much more data-driven and sort of like open notebook in its nature. And one of these experiments we're doing is with a Wiley journal called Advanced Intelligent Systems. And what I'm going to show you is that it's an attempt through which we're trying to get the authors to publish as much of their notebook, of their raw data as possible. So this is a published version of an article, and as you can see, it's on the Wiley Online Library. And on the right, I highlighted one of the figures in the article. It's the figure here to the right. Now, what we did is that we got in touch with the authors and we enabled them to to publish their work as a preprint as early as possible. So onto the next slide, I'll show you the preprint version of the article. Here it is. It's on the platform that Jude mentioned before, Autoria. And what you'll see is that the article was posted, and so as such, he has a title, list of author, the abstract. He also has on the bottom left a connection to the actual published version, so that we're able to connect the preprint to a version of record. But importantly, what you'll see on the right is the figure, the same figure 4 that was created by the authors. Now, as you can see, what I'm doing is I'm actually zooming in and rotating and highlighting parts of the data displayed in the figure. So what this is allowing the public as well as other researchers to do is to actually drill into the data and provide a much more interactive visualization of the data itself. The great thing about this is that authors actually do enjoy very much sharing all of the work that they put into creating some of these data visualization dashboards. And by enabling the preprint to have a much more open notebook version of the article is increasing access and usability of the research results themselves. And I think I'm at time, so Jude, I'm gonna stop there. I think I used my 10 minutes.
Oh, that was interesting. I didn't even feel the 10 minutes go by. So thank you so much, Catherine, Sven, and Alberto. That flowed like butter. I, of course, saw the presentation beforehand, but I didn't exactly hear it live properly, and this is just super interesting. So without further ado, if you have any questions, please do put it up in the questions tab on your right or left side where it sits for you. And yeah, we'll kick off with our first question, which is directed at Catherine. What is a major challenge for a publisher like Wiley in transition to an open science world? And do you believe these challenges are equal for publishers of all sizes?
Well, that's a bit of a multifaceted question there, Jude. I think a couple of things. So probably our biggest challenge, probably any publisher's biggest challenge right now is the challenge of infrastructure. How do we provide the best, the most appropriate, the most kind of connected and to the user seamless infrastructure in order to deliver the best possible publishing, payment, licensing, customer-centric service in an open access environment. And I talked a lot about the researcher in my brief presentation at the start. The researcher, the author, is absolutely a critical customer to us, but there are also customers in the form of funders, in the form of institutions and library consortia, all of whom have expectations of an ability to keep track of their payments with a publisher, to keep track of the publishing output of their authors at their institution, and for all of the systems required to deliver an increasingly rich data lake around that to be as streamlined and as efficient as possible. So I'd probably say infrastructure is our biggest challenge. With respect to, is that challenge the same for publishers large or small? You could certainly argue that for a large publisher, such as Wiley, we have it's maybe easier to find solutions or to resource solutions to solve some of those infrastructure challenges. We've absolutely found that partnering with teams, partnering with other companies, partnering with groups outside of our business has helped us to solve some of those challenges, and arguably that's easier for a large publisher than it is for a small one. Maybe I would also quickly add that the size and the diversity of the portfolio that some of the big publishers have can be a bit of an advantage and a disadvantage. We talked a little bit about the pace of change and the fact that some subject disciplines, some regions are moving at different speeds than others, and that I would say is probably a bigger challenge for some of the big publishers than it is for those that are very focused on one discipline or one particular territory.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And we have the questions flowing in. So this is a question for all panelists. So it's up for grabs, whoever's the bravest. Data availability is gaining traction, but do you have a sense of how usable that data alone is?
That's a really good question. Maybe I'll start and then Sven and Alberto can jump in. Data availability is absolutely a kind of hot topic. It has been a hot topic for a little while now, and it's become maybe more of one since in the last few months since the White House policy announcement. We still see lots of authors whose data availability statement is as simple as data is available upon request, and that's not really making data available, and it's definitely not making data reusable and kind of curated and advancing the kind of cause of the discipline. So I think there's quite a long way for us to go in that particular space.
I will probably just add that, of course, there's like different layers and levels of making data available. I'm not gonna talk about data availability statements, and of course, like some of the problems associated with just like saying like data available upon request, which, as Catherine was saying, really means that data is not available most of the time. But I will say that even when data is actually made available, right, there's a lot of work that goes into enabling other authors, researchers, the public to actually use and make sense of the data over time. And what I'll say is that one thing that we're experimenting with that I think has a lot more potential is to actually enable the kind of dashboard that I showed before in the presentation. A dashboard is a way to you can still make your data fully available in its rawest form, but enabling the public, authors, other researchers to really have at least an interface through which you can play with the data in the most possible direct way. I think it's a simple way to just at least explicitly say, hey, I'm not only sharing a data set that then, it's up to you to figure out how to open, how to understand, and, hopefully there's all the metadata that will describe what I actually did with my data. But a visualization is the best possible way to showcase that the data was analyzed, filtered, and displayed in a specific way. And I believe that's a great first step to make data available and understandable for other users and the public.
Brilliant. We do have quite a selection of questions coming in. This question starts off with a statement. There's a lot of talk about STEM, and they're asking about other relevant other trends outlined are relevant in the same way to SSH disciplines. What are the main drivers and opportunities of OA for these fields for SSH?
Yeah, maybe I can say a few words to that, because at Knowledge Unlatched we are primarily working with humanities and social sciences content. I think it's an interesting question because it looking at STM and HSS demonstrates so much how different the disciplines still are when it comes even to trends that some people say are technology driven. So they are not technology driven because there's no point in not applying all the metrics that we apply to STM to HSS, or just very little one. But there's a lot of publishing traditions, habits in certain disciplines and so on that still make a piece of content in high energy physics very different from applied linguistics or other things. And I think that's something that publishers that are also looking for efficiency through standardization. Certain fields probably struggle with. I guess that's the reason why there are still a number of very highly specialized publishers. So if you look at open access for journals, for example, Knowledge Unlatched is part of Subscribe to Open initiatives, which haven't seen any traction, almost no traction, I have to say, in STM. There are a few notable examples, but those are more in fields like mathematics, where you can have a long conversation whether the is STM or not. So I would say it's still pretty distinct. The disciplines are pretty different, and I think it's up to funders and also publishers to find means and ways to allow for differences and not just apply one business model and one approach to all disciplines and all fields. I guess that's, even if it's hard negotiating so many particular and special cases, it will be necessary in the future. And that's why we need experts, both in publishing and sales and also in libraries, who really understand how the different disciplines work and don't only sell something or buy something, but you need a deeper understanding, I guess, of the mechanics of these disciplines.
Thank you. We do have a couple of questions that did come in, but I guess we're at time and we aim to finish in time, but still, I would say that if you have any further questions as the ones that you had asked and ones that haven't been answered, please do, I speak for all of the speakers as well, do email us to get to know more, also to ask your question. And thank you so much for being here today with us. And thank you so much for the speakers, of course, Catherine, Sven, and Alberto. That was fantastic. I'm not being biased, I promise, because I invited you three for this webinar, but it was really fantastic. And thank you for all the attendees as well. We do have the first part of the webinar, which will be online. You'll be getting an email with information to that as well as this recording. And please don't hesitate to contact us. And thank you very much for attending. Take care.